They have every query ever since, they started running this on a few boxes at Stanford. The question is whether that data is identifiable to you.
It's no secret that Google keeps its users' search terms. They say they analyze that data to refine their search engine and other programs. Marissa Meyer is a Google vice president.
If I'm a Google user, you have years worth of my search terms, stuff that may contain all kinds of incredibly personal data. If I use other Google services, you can see the contents of my email, my documents, my spreadsheets, my personal photos, my voicemail, even the contacts in my address book. You guys really know everything about me.
Well, we don't know everything about you, but I think the most important thing on all these products, on most of these products, in fact, all of these products, our philosophy is transparency, choice, and control. Be very transparent about what data you have associated with that particular user. Give the users very clear choices about whether or not to use the product at all. And then give them control over their data, because we really do believe that the users own their own data and they should be able to control it.
That may be Google's policy, but it's not the law. No one really owns the data, but Google controls it, and the volume of it is staggering.
This is the geo display. Each dot is a query, each color is a language.
Almost 2 billion Google searches are done every day.
And this is actually the live queries right now.
That has created an astoundingly intimate database of who we are and what we think.
People turn to the search engine box and admit things to it that they would not admit to their doctor, their shrink, their priest, their wife or husband, or anyone else, without a thought that all of these queries are being stored.
If that doesn't give you pause, Seton Hall law professor Frank Pasquale has a suggestion. Imagine someone reading through a list of every Google search you've ever done.
There are things that can be misinterpreted, or that could somehow shed a bad light or shed a false light on somebody. You may just be interested in a certain topic, but it may associate you with a topic like terrorism or something like that. If you're doing a school report on that, that would be tough if you ultimately found yourself on, say, some TSA watch list because it ended up getting to the TSA.
Yeah, but isn't a search done on Google completely anonymous?
It depends. If you're signed in, it's definitely not anonymous. If you're not signed in, that search will at least be connected to your IP address, which is the unique address of your computer on the network.
Privacy advocates say the digital footprints we leave behind, from cell phones, GPS devices, and search engines, just to start, have created a huge array of targets for prying eyes. Not just from marketers and hackers, but also the government and law enforcement officials pursuing terrorists and other criminals.
Police, don't move! Don't move!
The Fourth Amendment protects citizens from unreasonable search and seizure. But the government has argued that it doesn't protect data handed over to a third party, like Google.
Can the government tell Google it wants, it demands all the information that Google has collected from any particular person who's done searches?
I believe that if you look at some of the examples of prosecutions and divorce actions there, that the answer would be yes. That because of something called the third-party doctrine, our Fourth Amendment law doesn't apply to a lot of things that you do online.
In fact, the Electronic Frontier Foundation estimates that Google is subpoenaed in lawsuits, criminal cases, and intelligence investigations tens of thousands of times a year. Though it sometimes fights these requests, Google is compelled to reveal its users' information in some cases. The company declined to tell us how often that happens.
People are treating Google like their most trusted friend. Should they be?
Well, I think judgment matters.
Eric Schmidt is Google's CEO.
If you have something that you don't want anyone to know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. But if you really need that kind of privacy, the reality is that search engines, including Google, do retain this information for some time. And it's important, for example, that we are all subject in the United States to the Patriot Act. It is possible that that information could be made available to the authorities.
The Patriot Act expanded one of the government's most powerful surveillance tools, the so-called National Security Letter. It allows law enforcement and intelligence agencies to see your internet activities without a judge's oversight. That's what worries Kevin Bankston, government access to Google's data.
Those in power have abused their surveillance authority as a matter of routine as you look through U.S. history. It's why we have the laws that we do.
But Eric Schmidt says protecting user privacy is Google's top priority.
Where does all my search info go?
Well, first place, we have our privacy policies are fully disclosed on our websites, and it's all written down very, very carefully. The most important thing we do is that after 18 months, the search information that you entered is so-called anonymized. It's literally gotten rid of, and we can't go back and track it back to you.
The data may seem anonymized, but if you combine it with enough other data, you can develop a pretty good profile of people, particularly, say, people in rural areas where there may not be that many internet users.
That's what happened in 2006, not with Google, but with AOL. In an attempt to aid scholars, AOL released a huge sample of anonymized search data, apparently without realizing it could be used to deduce the identities of users.
I had no idea. I couldn't find my own searches if I tried.
People like Candace Carpenter of Brooklyn. She had done AOL searches involving her legal work, her daughter's interests, and her family history. Much to her surprise, that supposedly anonymized data was enough to lead us straight to her.
I don't like the thought that my daughter's going to be evaluated based on searches I'm doing, but I can see that that could happen, and I certainly don't want people being able to find my daughter.
Google has not had a similar incident.
Right now, Google hasn't harmed anyone, doesn't really generate nightmares or tragedies. But who's to say what Google's going to be like in 5 or 10 years? Google's mission...
Siva Vaidyanathan is a professor of media studies and law at the University of Virginia.
We cannot rely on how much we trust this company. It's great that we trust them now. It's great that we use them now. But let's be careful about this because companies don't last.
The concern, experts say, is that Google or pieces of its database could someday be sold or spun off or end up in different hands. Or that the company's priorities and policies could simply change over time. Worries over Google and privacy become even more troubling to critics, given that Google is big and only getting bigger.
There's no reason to think that in 5 years Google won't essentially be the equivalent of the web itself, because it's active in so many different areas of the web, including hosting web publishing and web video and so forth.
Google's size and its ever-expanding reach have even attracted the scrutiny of the U.S. Department of Justice. Google says it's unwarranted.
Do you see Google as the most powerful company in the world?
No, not at all.
You have a lot of information, though, about people.
But we don't use it, and we don't misuse it. We could misuse it, but if we did, we would quickly become much less powerful because everyone would flee to our competitors. So part of the answer to the criticism that's implied by your question and the direct ones by others is that if we broke our trust with our end users, they would leave, and then we wouldn't be very important anymore.
These mobile phones have eyes, they've got a camera, they've got ears, every one of them has a microphone, they've got skin, you can touch them, and they're increasingly augmenting our own senses.
The idea is you see something that interests you, you whip out your camera phone, take a picture of the object of interest, and this will trigger a Google search.
Congratulations. Here's your phone. Cool.
Don't look now, but that unassuming guy in the t-shirt handing out free Google cell phones
I'll give you your phone far less professionally than it would happen otherwise.
Is actually one of the wealthiest and most powerful business leaders in the world.
I'd like to introduce Sergey Brin, who's going to be joining us.
Hello.
Why would Sergey Brin, one of the 2 billionaire co-founders of Google, bother showing up at some mobile phone conference? Because for Google, the stakes couldn't be higher. Mobile phone use is skyrocketing, more than 4 billion worldwide, with 1 billion sold in 2008 alone. Brin wants to make sure Android, Google's operating system for mobile phones, gets a big piece of that market.
If you can't look at the search results on your cell phone reasonably because the browser's not capable enough or the application sophistication is not good enough, then we can't really deliver you that information when you're using your phone. But Android has allowed us to bridge that gap.
The conference been good for you guys?
Yeah, it's been great.
Bryn has tapped this man, Vic Gundotra, to make sure that as the world goes mobile, Google goes with it.
Why is it so important for Google to have a major presence on cell phones?
We are seeing a very fundamental shift where increasingly, particularly among a young demographic and in Asian countries, the primary access to the internet is not through the PC, but through mobile devices.
Google first put its Android software in phones in 2008. Other manufacturers like Motorola, Samsung, and even Dell are now jumping on the Android bandwagon. But it'll still be a struggle for Google Android to challenge the 800-pound gorilla of mobile phones, Apple.
The new iPhone, 3G.
Apple's iPhone, with its vast market of software applications, or apps, has huge momentum in the world of so-called smartphones, which act more like handheld computers and web browsers than simple cell phones.
In some respects, we're past the era of the PC and into the era of extrasensory computing. These mobile phones have eyes, they've got a camera, they've got ears, every one of them has a microphone, they've got skin, you can touch them, and they're increasingly augmenting our own senses.
So far, there are roughly 10,000 apps available for Google Android.
It's called Pocket Auctions for eBay, and it's essentially a miniaturized version of eBay on your Android handset.
10,000 apps sounds pretty impressive until you consider that the Apple iPhone has more than 100,000.
Hi. Hi, what do you got there?
To beef up Google's offerings, Gundotra has to convince software developers and the makers of smartphones that the smart money is on Android.
What are you demoing here?
We're doing Mafia Wars.
He works the crowd with the enthusiasm of an evangelist.
We're counting on folks like you to come up with these great ideas to move the web forward. So what do you guys have here?
Geodelic.
Google needs private developers like these, but it's also developing Android programs on its own, in-house. Hartmut Navin leads a Google team racing to launch an ambitious new technology. They're trying to tie the cameras in smartphones to the immense power of Google's search engine. Its official title is Google Goggles, but at the time, they were calling it Visual Search.
So imagine you're a tourist, you arrive at this place and you would like to know more about it. All you will have to do is you take a shot of the sign, and you see we recognize this as the Santa Monica Pier. Google Visual Search is a new technology that essentially allows you to trigger a search of an image. So the idea is you see something that interests you, you whip out your camera phone, take a picture of the object of interest, and this will trigger a Google